Good afternoon. Bienvenidos a la 18th Annual Six Bridges Book Festival. My name is Ginger Young, and I'm so glad that you've joined us for the festival's kickoff session featuring Andrea Bartz and Melissa Lozada-Oliva. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to take care of. Thanks to a grant through the Arkansas Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities, we are excited to offer today's session in Spanish, courtesy of our interpreter, Enrica Ardemagni. Si prefieres escuchar en español, primero, en los controles, haz clic en la palabra interpretation. Segundo, haz clic en la palabra Spanish. Para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haz clic en Mute Original Audio. We'll be using the chat feature today to communicate. This is where you can post any questions you would like me to ask the authors, as participants will be muted the entire session. This is also the place to ask for any technical troubleshooting from our Zoom squad support, Nathan Smith. We will both be monitoring the chat and will respond as quickly as we are able. I work at Wordsworth Books, and I'm excited to announce that Wordsworth is the official bookseller for the Six Bridges Book Festival. If you would like to purchase Andrea and Melissa's books, you can order online at the Festival Bookstore and shop on the Six Bridges website, or visit me or another bookseller in person at the store. We're located in the Heights, just off North University between Cantrell and Kavanaugh. If you're not joining us from the Little Rock area, we offer shipping, and our authors have signed book plates to include with the books while supplies last. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our featured authors. Andrea Bartz is a Brooklyn-based journalist and the author of The Lost Night, The Herd, and We Were Never Here, a Reese's Book Club pick and New York Times bestseller. Her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and many other outlets. She has held editorial positions at Glamour, Psychology Today, and Self, among others. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Melissa Lozada-Oliva is a child of Guatemalan and Colombian immigrants. She co-hosts the podcast Say More and is a member of the band Melly and the Specs. She holds an MFA in poetry from NYU, and her writing has been featured in Remezcla, Paper, The Guardian, The Breakbeat Poets Volume 4, Wirecutter, Vulture, Bustle, Glamour, The Huffington Post, Muzzle Magazine, The Poetry Project, Audible, and BBC Mundo. Her most recent work, Dreaming of You, a novel in verse. Oh, there's a glare. I'm sorry. Releases next Tuesday, which is why I have it on PDF and not in real life. So next Tuesday, yay, October 26th. Melissa is from Massachusetts and lives in New York City. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to meet you guys. So we're going to start today by letting the authors share a little bit from these works that we just mentioned, and then we'll get into a time of discussion. So we're going to let Andrea start us off with the reading today.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I'm going to read a very short passage that's from the beginning of We Were Never Here, so it shouldn't require too much setup since it's the start of the book. Kristen trotted to the patio's edge and crouched, long arm outstretched. Her fingers groped along a vine, lifting leaves, exposing the tender stalks beneath. I pictured her tipping over and tumbling off, there and then not there, the after image of her silhouette still hanging in my vision. I don't know why. For a wild moment, I pictured pushing her. Instead, I half stood from the table. "Kristen, don't," I called. The wooden patio perched on stilts above the vines below, and we were alone, as we had been almost everywhere we'd stopped this week. Empty restaurants, empty markets, empty tourist information centers, an occasional cluster of other visitors standing or sitting nearby despite everyone having all the space in the world. A snapping sound, and Kristen stood, holding up a blob of green grapes. She popped one into her mouth and chewed thoughtfully. "Not bad. Catch." I missed the toss, and the grapes bounced onto the glass tabletop. I glanced around, then tried one. It burst bright and tart on my tongue. He said their yield sucks this year. You didn't need to take an entire bunch. She sank into her chair and lifted her pisco sour, lime green and frothy. I'll leave him a few extra pesos on the way out. I was hungry. She nudged her glass against mine. You'd rather see me steal some grapes than get low blood sugar, right? Fair point. Hangry Kristen could cut to the core. A man with a bandana looped around his head was watching us from far out in the fields, just before the grapevines bumped up against a row of bushy trees. Beyond that, braided hills cut a jagged horizon. Kristen waved at the worker, and he nodded. I let the last of my drink linger on my tongue. We'd been sipping these daily. Lime juice, powdered sugar, and the yellowish brandy the Chileans swore predated Peruvian pisco. I felt the swell of yet another one of those, well, isn't this nice moments, one blissfully free from the fear that had prickled my brain nonstop for the last 13 months. Here I was on the trip of a lifetime, 7 nights in South America, exploring the rough mountains and the ripe valleys between with my best friend of more than a decade. A cocktail so bracing and sweet, it tasted like stepping into the surf. And we still had 2 nights to go. Kristen made everything better, her confidence like a bell jar of security in a strange and gnarled world. When we'd hugged at the airport almost a week ago, tears of relief had coated my eyes. I hadn't seen her in a year pockmarked by panic attacks, nightmares, and screaming into my pillow or the shower or occasionally my fist. But in Santiago, as we picked up our rental car and driven north on barren highways, Kristen was her usual boisterous self. She whooped when the Pacific came into view. She honked at a clump of plush alpacas by the side of the road. She pointed and gasped at roadside fruit stands, rippling cornfields with laser straight rows, fat fields of vegetables growing bushy in the sun. And sky, so much blue sky, almost crackling in its crispness. The way it shot down into the ocean on one side and the crinkled peaks on the other. Her presence was like a calming scent, aerosolized Xanax, and I allowed myself to relax. We spent the first night in La Serena, where we carried leaky ice cream cones around a leafy town square and stayed in a hotel with bright colors on the walls, where paintings of saints watched us as we slept. Too touristy, we decided, and the next morning we drove inland. In Pisco Elqui, we took a yoga class from a woman with bowed knees and hip-length hair. As we stood in mountain pose, our chests puffed out, she announced, "Your smile powers your corazón, your heart." On the second night there, 3 college-age guys from Germany cornered us in a bar, and the panic came roaring back like a panther lying in wait. Kristen had taken the lead. She was charming, could talk to anybody. And when she'd noticed the fear in my eyes, she politely disentangled us from the cocky trio and led me back into the night. "It's okay, it's me, I'm here," she kept murmuring as we walked the dark streets back to our hotel. "Kristen's here." Her voice was a balm, her words a weighted blanket. We packed up and left the following day. And this morning, we arrived here in Quiteria. At first, I'd been alarmed by its emptiness. We'd parked in a lot and wandered the hilly streets, our suitcases trailing behind us like dejected toddlers for what felt like hours before we found an open hotel. There, I scored the keys to a small suite, the duvet damp despite the dry mountain air. The sun was sinking, and I realized the city's vacancy would be an asset. Fewer men to bother us, 2 women walking the streets at night. You know what they say about women traveling alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I already told Andrea I'm a firm believer in no spoilers, so I'm not going to give anything away. But I will just tell you that is it is such a good setup for this book, because it already, like, you get this idea in your head, you know something's going on, but you're in this really idyllic place, and just be prepared. Like, if that made you a little tense because you're like, what's going on? Just get ready, because that's going to be how you are through the entire book, in a good way, in the best way. So thank you for that. Melissa, would you tell us a little bit about your book and then share with us the piece you've selected from it?
Yeah. Also I had myself on mute because there's a bunch of construction work happening and I didn't want the banging and clanging of a um, machine to interrupt your reading. So my book is called Dreaming of You. It's about a poet whose name is also Melissa, who brings Selena back to life through a seance and the consequences that follow, and kind of this like interrogation of identity and self and obsession and longing and celebrity. And I think I haven't done this yet, so I wanted to see how it would feel, but I just wanted to read it from the beginning. It's sort of kept together by this Greek chorus of chismosas, who are this like all-knowing gossipers who are telling the story. So I'll do that, and then the first poem. Hello, querido reader. Do you like poetry? Maybe you like songs. Do songs get trapped in your head like a rat on sticky paper? Are you afraid of dying, and does it fuel you? We aren't trying to sell you anything, but consider hanging us on your wall. Primero que todo, we love chisme. What is a meal without the seasoning of gossip? What is a conversation without a little talking some shit? We make eyes at each other through the trees. We clink our beers together on rooftops. We send messages later on the car ride home. We all know the story of Selena Quintanilla, the Tejana pop star who was murdered by her best friend and the manager of her fan club, Yolandas-Oliva. There are heroes. There are villains. There are fans. There are girls trying to find their reflection in a rippling pond and then feeling startled when a piece of gum falls out of their mouth. There is a frog that thinks the gum is a fly and chokes to death. Where were we? This is a story of mirrors, or what happens when you bring the mirror back from the dead, and when you look in it, you see yourself eating yourself. This is about you, except when it's not about you. This is a love story, but it isn't our story. However, as chismosas, we feel that it happened to us. So we believe we are the best ones to tell it. We will try to tell it to you the best that we can. First, let's introduce our speaker, Melissa, who does not speak entirely for us. She is a girl who dreams a lot. Dreaming of you. I want to know who the you is. Is it God? Is it a band? Is it the person we're confessing to in a diary? My professor said second person is useless, but maybe that makes it powerful. I used to think God was living in the glow-in-the-dark star I had stuck on the ceiling as a child, and whenever I would masturbate, I'd turn away. Late at night, when all the world is sleeping, I stay up and think that everyone I've ever loved is the same whimsical spirit floating from one sad flesh husk to the next. I will spoon the wall, or the wall will spoon me, and all of the spirits, every sad clown, every animated guitar, every inside joke about an arbitrary sock will hold me until they fall asleep. You and me are having sex to a movie, or during a movie, or at a movie, in conversation with. At least we're in the dark enough so I don't have to feel bad about my body. At least there's only this light from the actors' faces floating across my skin. I'm afraid even my orgasms have dimples. I text you, dang, I have plans. But what I really mean is, what is better than me and my imagination? What is more loving than all of the ways I can invent you touching me? Regretfully, the barista who gave me $1 coffees didn't have a crush on me, but was just new and was recently fired because he didn't know how to use the machine. I saw him at the bar last night. I waved to him. He cocked his head and turned around. Today, I walked into a coffee shop, but no one was there who looked like they could completely fuck up my life and inspire a mediocre poem and a half, so I just left. That was a lie. All three of those things. I am a poet for a living, which is not something I ever thought could happen. But alas, I won the YouTube lottery while it was still hot, and I got out before it wasn't. I go to colleges and talk about myself musically. I get fan mail. I help young girls see themselves. I guess that makes me happy. I crave a ferry to San Francisco and a dead phone full of messages. I'm horny for an empty chair and a street crawling with the shadows of strangers. It feels good to have all eyes on me. It feels better to blow them all away like ladybugs. I can't say for sure if I've ever had good sex. I just know that I can enjoy myself and that afterward there's a fertile kind of sadness. I wish all my friends could have sex with my lover so that way we could compare notes, but none of my friends are single. I guess what I'm saying is I miss my friends. Why are people in relationships always taking naps? I came to New York to get an MFA, but also maybe to fall in love. Don't tell anyone that. New York is cool because you only start dating someone so that it's easier to pay the rent. That being said, my roommates are always ending things and I can always hear them. Anna says, I just feel like I'm capable of feeling love for multiple people. Delilah's like, but you will always love me the most, right? On and off for days and hours. They cry and they scream and they pull out their hair and then it gets longer. I want to pull back the curtain that separates my bedroom and theirs to tell them to break up, please. Just kidding. It isn't a curtain. It's a series of jackets duct taped together. Just kidding. It's a collection of Polaroids throughout the years that I've strung together with twine. Also kidding. It's just a door. I keep it closed. If you must know, my parents had a bad divorce when I was 12. But before that, they would dance at the family functions. They would bachata across the floor, heads together, hands pressed against necks and backs, sweating and swaying in this violent way everyone always said I could sway because it's in my blood. That is how I like to remember it anyway. Dreaming of You was released posthumously, which is a word that I used to believe meant after you were funny. If you're that pretty, can you have a good sense of humor? Come on. I can't help but crack the hell up listening to Selena whisper, "Como te necesito." Is that what boys would want me to whisper into their ears? Spanish songs are also dramatic. Everything is a stage, I guess, or the altar we die on. So wring your hands at my feet, set some candles on my shoulders, place those flowers in my eyeballs, baby, cry over my wardrobe. I don't know. Don't listen to me. That won't make a good song. How about towards the end when she whispers, I love you, and answers, I love you too. It's like I can see her. It's like she's talking to me. It's like she's alone in her room in some apartment in the ceiling. She's got her fuzzy slippers on. She's got her hair in two tight black trencitas. There's a green exfoliant mask settled on her moon face. The lights are on because she's a girl who is all at once confident and afraid. She's holding up her two hands and she's pinching them into mouths. She's making them kiss. Thank you.
Thank you. I will say that I had the running Selena soundtrack in my head the whole time. Just Dreaming of You. That was I could not get that song out of my head. So that was great. Also, it was so cool to actually hear your voice because her syntax, when you see the text, when you see the way she writes the poetry, you get that. But it's even better hearing her read it. But it's still also, I know, and that actually was one of we'll talk about that at some point about spoken word versus written word with poetry. But I wanted to talk to you guys about how you wrote these pieces. Melissa, this is your first novel. You are, and so I'm getting in my head, I have Melissa in the book and Melissa in real life. And so you can correct me when I refer to something and you're like, no, that's book Melissa, yeah. Real Melissa, that's not her. But you are a poet, that is true. How did this novel come together? Some of the poems I know were previously published. Is it a chicken egg kind of thing? You had the poems, you realized there was a connection, you wanted to further that connection? Or did you go into it thinking, I want to write a novel in verse?
I went into it with this idea of Selena going to a Halloween party, and she was the only person who looked the most like Selena, but everyone around her was also dressed like Selena. So I was really obsessed with like this zombie Selena. And then I was writing all these zombie Selena poems. And then I realized I was like, well, how did she come back and why? And then I was writing all these other poems that were kind of these like love poems and poems about like having OCD and anxiety and like death. And I didn't really want it to be a novel in verse. I thought of it as more like a rock opera. My professor told me that like sometimes novel in verses, the poems don't get to sing because they are too busy like telling a story. So it was really important for me to poems to like stand out on their own, even when they're telling a story. So I kind of like Frankenstein. This book is very like Selena's Frankenstein, and in a similar way, I like Frankenstein and like stitched a bunch of poems that I had together to like make this little monster. Yeah.
Well, it works. There have been times when I've read novels in verse where it is, like you said, you lose the individuality of each piece because it's all working toward the greater goal of telling a story. But this one succeeds in both. Like there's definitely a through line. There's definitely a narrative. You know what's happening. You're following this progress of Melissa resurrecting Selena and the consequences of that. But then you also, there are just very beautiful individual poems that I know I will come back to and sit with them in context for themselves, not just within context of the book. So yeah, Frankenstein, you did it. You put it together for sure. Andrea, your other two books, The Lost Night and The Herd, are also thrillers. In order for a thriller to work, there are so many more elements at play than just the plot. Like pacing is incredibly important, and having those crescendos and decrescendos and giving your reader those moments of and then letting them breathe a little bit before you do that to them again, because you don't want to give them a heart attack. When you write a thriller, how does that process work? Like, are you thinking of that as you go along? Is it a tweaking thing? I'm just curious about how you approach writing this type of book.
Yeah. So my first two books, The Lost Night and The Herd, are both essentially whodunits. And so there's sort of this driving question throughout. The Lost Night, there's a dead body in like a warehouse after a warehouse party in circa 2009 Bushwick. And in The Herd, it's a sort of bougie, exclusive, all-female co-working space, and the founder of it disappears. So in both cases, there's a very clear driving narrative of this whodunit. And so in that sense, they followed a little bit of the same formula, because you know exactly what central question is in the reader's mind and what you're holding back and sort of piling little pieces on and little clues, and they're sort of putting together the puzzle. And I knew for my next book, I still wanted to write a thriller, but I didn't want it to be a whodunit anymore. I wanted it to be a thriller that sort of like worked in a different way and took the reader on another journey, but was every bit as, and hopefully more, heart-pounding and suspenseful. And so the idea for We Were Never Here, and I think I was so excited to read, I didn't even give sort of the one sentence summary. We Were Never Here is a thriller that's about two globetrotting best friends who are on vacation together in Chile and wind up killing a backpacker in self-defense and ditching the body because it's not a great thing to deal with police in a foreign country. But the wild thing is that this is not the first time that one of their trips has ended in bloodshed. So there's sort of their friendship being tested, stretched to the limit, as well as the walls closing in on their cover up. And so for this book, it's not a whodunit. You know exactly who done it from, I think it's like the second or third chapter is when there's actually this murder, this killing in self-defense, and we see it firsthand. And so, I thought it was fun to start with this big bang of this violent thing, and then just sort of have the walls closing in both on their friendship and on sort of, there's all these forces pursuing them. There's, the family of the deceased. Are they going to be discovered? There's, authority. There's, the police in several countries. And so for me, it was really about tracking like their friendship and how it would change and the dynamics of that, and like how both women in this friendship would be thinking and feeling differently about what's just happened and how they're going to deal with it and how they're going to get through it together. In addition to, throwing these obstacles in their way of like, a cat and mouse, like people actually being on their trail, and are they going to get away with it? So, for me, it was just really fun to keep kind of cranking that tension up as it reaches a boiling point, both with their friendship and with these, horrible sort of skeletons, almost literal skeletons in their closet. And that's kind of how I approached it.
Right. Well, like Melissa was successful Frankensteining her poems, you were successful in building that tension. I told you in my email yesterday that I finished it and then I couldn't go to bed. I had to watch some stupid TV to decompress because my brain was just going, thinking. And that is what you want a thriller to do. I told one of my coworkers, it's like, she's giving me so many feelings. I guess I want these feelings. Yeah, you can even hear it in my voice. I got very tense.
I'm here to make you uncomfortable.
Well,
if I can do that, then I've succeeded.
Success. it worked. So yeah, I also like a good whodunit too. So will be interested in reading your other books. But yeah, this is definitely more of the psychological thriller. I think I was more probably stressed out by their relationship, that conflict, more than the actual murder, which maybe that sounds horrible, but that was what caused me more tension for sure. All right, audience members, I want to again remind you that you can use the chat feature to ask us any questions that you have. I'm hoping that I am seeing everything. If I'm not, Nathan can help me make sure I'm getting questions if they're out there. I don't want to leave you guys out. We want to know what you have to say. Your books are not biographical, but based on reading your acknowledgments, I can see that there are things in your lives that influence the books. Andrea, in your acknowledgments, you mentioned that this story was cooked up in a hotel suite in Chile. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, I was in Chile with a friend, and we were in the Elqui Valley, not realizing, much like the characters in the book, that we would be there in almost the off season, the shoulder season. And so it was very empty. A lot of stuff was closed. And so on our first day there, we pretty quickly bumped into and befriended the one other backpacker in town. And he was this awesome guy named Steven that we're still in touch with. Steven was Australian. And it was just one of those magical things that happens on a trip sometimes where you're just instant best friends. And it's like you've known each other forever. And then, your lives intersect and then you both go off in different directions. But the three of us hung out the entire time we were there, had such an easy rapport. And he was actually so not creepy. And so we're so comfortable together that we almost immediately had a running joke about how Steven was actually a psycho who was trying to kill us and steal our money. And he was just truly so great that we all kept joking about this, and, jokes about how trusting my friend Jen and I were about this guy that we didn't even know. And wow. And it was the last night and we were sitting in the hotel suite that my friend and I had rented. And we were all drinking wine. And somebody made a joke again. I think it was like, oh, Steven, you're running out of time if you're going to kill us and run off with all of our money. And I just kind of tilted my head and I said, Steven, you've known us exactly as long as we've known you. And you didn't even watch me pour your wine in the kitchen. So what makes you so convinced that, you shouldn't be afraid of us? And there was sort of a long silence. This is apparently how my mind works as a thriller writer. And he kind of was finally like, well, I guess I don't know. And someone said, that sounds like a thriller. And so then we quickly, jumped on a running joke about what the story would be. But it really stuck with me that even I, a thriller author who is trained in the art of seeing the darkness in everybody, just assumed that if anyone should be afraid, if anyone should be worried about violence, it was the women. That was just such a given. And so from that, I just kind of was turning over in my head, what would be a scenario where the arrow of violence might go the other way from women who, have the gall to travel and therefore are asking for it and putting themselves into a potentially dangerous situation. If they were the ones to actually commit violence against a man, what would that look like? And how would that, what would be all sort of the consequences that spilled out of that. So we didn't actually kill him. He's alive and well, but the whole thing did come out of that one little exchange in our running joke.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's great. And you're right that it's one of those beautiful travel moments. That's part of why I think those connections are as much why we travel as seeing other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
So, Very cool. Did you send him the book? Has he read it?
I don't think he's read it yet. I've told him a few times. He's still traveling all over, and he doesn't have a Kindle. He doesn't have like technology. Basically, he like didn't get a smartphone until recently. So he was like, I need to get it. He's read my older books, which is very sweet. After we met, he got them.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's pretty brave.
It's always hard to prove like those people exist.
I know.
They don't have technology. Yeah.
Although then, there's a
like, did I make this person up?
Yeah. Like, no, we have photos, right? And then I had a note in my, one of the people that, the backpacker that these women kill in the book, similarly, like really had no digital footprint, and that was working to their advantage. And my editor was like, is that realistic? And I was like, you don't know, Stephen. But believe you me, there's backpackers like this with no plan, none of the safety things that a woman would need. They're just getting on buses, going wherever they want, not leaving a trail. So yes, there are people like this.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we just don't think about that in 2021, that people, that used to be the norm, and now you just don't think about that.
Yeah.
Melissa, you say in your acknowledgments, you thank your big sister Stephanie for showing you Selena. And one of the first poems in the book is called My Sisters and I Would Watch the Selena Movie. Is that true? Like, did you guys watch the Selena movie? Were you fans of her music growing up?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like the book is like fan fiction memoir. And so like a lot of the stuff with my family is true, though it maybe is good to be like, this is fiction, guys, so that they don't like after me. But yeah, we did. I like one of my first memories, she's like 8 years older than me, and her 13th birthday party was to go see the Selena movie. And then we just like, I don't know, we had like 3 tapes, and we would just like watch them over and over again, because that's like what you would do. And we would watch the Selena movie over and over. And so yeah, that poem is kind of just about like her influence over our lives as like young Latinas. And us like growing up and like coming into our womanhood, and like eventually like outliving her. And also like outliving our childhood. And, all of us are like follow our like hearts or our dreams. Like I go to New York, my sister gets married, my other sister gets married. Like we're not like under the same roof, watching the movie again. So yeah.
That's one of the ones that stayed with me, and that I feel like I will go back and read again, because it resonated with me. And that's why I thought, like, surely this is real. But then I feel bad when I do that to writers. I'm like, well, just because they made it feel real doesn't mean it's that happened. But that one just had there was so much truth to it. I was like, I need to ask her that, if that was an actual case.
Yeah. I just had someone ask me in a book club, they said, how do you write about murder without personal experience? And I was like, I've killed people. No, what do you think? Like, I use my imagination. Do people ask Stephen King how he writes about ghosts without being haunted?
Right.
Like, what on earth?
Did a clown really come to you? Did an alien clown ruin your childhood and give you PTSD?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. So that I guess I don't make those assumptions about murders, but the really, like, I don't know, the intensely personal stuff, that I tend to, I don't know, I credit that to something the author has experienced, even if not exactly in that way.
Oh yeah.
So in addition to going down a Selena rabbit hole and listening to a lot of Selena music and watching videos, Melissa, I kind of went down a Melissa rabbit hole because you have an internet presence where you do a lot of performance work of your poetry. And one of your poems, which is not in the book, like Totally Whatever, really got me thinking about both of your current works, yours and Andrea's. In it, you're responding to old white men trying to tell you how to speak and what they find problematic with your way of speaking. And responding to them, you say, maybe it's evolution of defense mechanism. And when I heard, like, I rewound it and I listened to that again, and I thought about it because it made me think, again, I did like a crazy quick read of all of your stuff, so it's all turning around in my head. But I felt like the characters in both of your books, they talk about what it's like to be a woman and having those defense mechanisms, not just in how they speak, but in how they act and the choices they make. I mean, for both books, it really drives the story, because what they're doing, so much of it is based on these defense mechanisms we have as women. A lot to unpack in both about women and identity and power. Are your characters expressing your thoughts, or which again, that's me make assumptions. We already kind of had that discussion. I know they don't have to be. Or is this theme something you like to, or is it important to explore this theme of being a woman in your writing? And I'll let Andrea go first with this one.
Sure. So yeah, I often say that my book is, yes, it's about a toxic friendship, and yes, there's a lot of juicy relationship stuff, but I thought I was writing a thriller about women's safety and women and violence against women, which it's interesting we even call it violence against women instead of male violence, because there's really a tendency to put it on the women. And it's seen, violence against women, whether it's, in its extreme forms, like intimate partner violence, or, violence against, women who are traveling, getting assaulted while you're traveling or something like that. Or, it's something as sort of innocent or everyday as like street harassment. It's just, we're very comfortable with it. It's very normal. It's very accepted. Women, are used to it. And we're just expected to kind of quietly let it be heaped upon us without ever dishing it back. And, I worked as a travel writer for years. The pandemic sort of put an end to that. But in addition to being a thriller writer, I wrote a lot of travel pieces. And so I've been to many, many countries by myself. And when I would share that with people, I would often get this response of, oh, like, you're so brave to do that, or I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't want my daughter to do that, or I wouldn't want my wife to do that, and to be there. And, people are sending me articles from the New York Times and other really big publications that are like, if you're a woman, here are all the things that you should do while you're traveling to keep yourself safe. And you should be shoving a door jamb underneath your door once you close it at the hotel. And, some people just say, never travel alone if you're a woman. And it all just stuck with me because it seems like all that hand wringing about, women's safety, especially while they're traveling, is sort of a way to keep women's lives small and to prevent women from traveling and to keep them from having those experiences that allow them to engage with the world and to, build up their own sense of confidence. I mean, some of the most confidence building experiences I've had are the worst travel experiences. When my wallet was stolen from me in Budapest on the second night of an 11-day 6-country trip. And I had to figure out what to do. And I didn't know a soul in the country or speak a word of the language. Like, it was hard, and I figured it out. And from that, I was like, I am gaining confidence in myself. Like, I took care of that. Like, wow, what a great feeling. That gives me more confidence. And that's something that women are cut off from in a way that men, again, look at like Steven, this great guy who like doesn't even need to let people know where he's going. He's just traveling around the world and trusting it'll be fine. And so, yeah, I sort of wanted to explore that idea. And a lot of, I think, Emily, the narrator's thoughts about violence against women and women's safety are my thoughts as well. It's sort of a way for me to grapple with what does it really mean when we treat it as acceptable that women are going to be sort of the recipients of violence just by existing in female form and going through their day.
Whoa. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I feel like my book is also speaking similarly to that, and is like very concerned with like what it means, like women's safety, and how like you said, like sometimes the idea of keeping women safe like makes us have a smaller life.
Yeah.
And like at the center of this book, I'm like, you know, is talking about like Selena's murder. Selena was like murdered by a woman. And Deborah Paredes, who wrote this really amazing book called Selenidad, which is about like Selena and Latina identity, says that like in a lot of ways, like the patriarchy caused that death to happen. And Selena's dad, who still has control over like her estate, and like was very controlling of like her career and life, maybe was responsible for her death because he was like making it so that she was trying to control her agency. And because of that, she like sneakily went to Yolanda's hotel room to like settle this business deal herself. And then Yolanda was like maybe a lesbian and maybe in love with Selena and felt that she couldn't have her in the way that like society like wouldn't. And then like this murder happens. So I'm also very interested in like what happens when like women have agency, and if that agency is actually like what they want or like informed by like patriarchy. And also because I'm like I was raised like pretty sheltered because my mom like wouldn't let me like answer the door because she always thought I was gonna get kidnapped. And it kept me very safe. I didn't like drink or have sex or do a drug until I was in college, which like I was like a narc completely, a narc and a virgin. But I was safe, but my life was like small, and because of that I'm like scared of everything. But this fear also like speaks to, I don't know, like wanting to like live very much. I don't know. Now I'm rambling, but yeah.
No, I love hearing you guys say that. It makes me think, okay, I wasn't just reading into it. Like that was
Yeah. No,
that
I
was
definitely
there, and it was a great connection to make between those texts.
Yeah. And if I can just
No,
quickly
please, keep
respond to
going.
that too.
Yeah,
And so
please.
that really resonates with you know what was going on in this book too. And what's interesting is you say like this was technically like female on female violence, but it really was about but you know, as you as the creator see it, it's not about it was a violence that was, you know, it was violence caused by patriarchy and by sort of this internalized misogyny and something different. And that really resonates because with my book, so many people, I literally had an interviewer say like, so, you know, why did you write a book that's about the perils of female friendship? And people really want to make it about Mean Girls because these two women are in a toxic, very close relationship that does involve emotional violence and like emotional abuse and verbal abuse. And, you know, there's stuff like that. And I kind of was like, well, I didn't think I did write a book about that was, you know, woman versus woman. I thought I was writing a book that was sort of like women versus world, and internalized misogyny and internalized sexism is a lot of that too, right? So that just, I wonder if, you writing a book that involves literal women on women violence, like kind of, you know, I guess the book is just coming out, so you'll see some of the reaction, but I will warn you, I have a feeling some people are going to really want to make it about Mean Girls. And that's, I think not, you know, what is at its heart.
Wow. Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think also, I mean, I'm like giving a lot of empathy to like her murderer because I'm just like, well, what if we don't see her as this like villain, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely. That was something that stood out to me. I was like, Yolanda's are like, she's obviously the perpetrator. I mean, she killed Selena, but that's you, but you're not right. But you write her as a person, in the fact that she connects with Melissa. And then, you see her humanity. I guess that's, with both of your books, the same way that the bad guy in your book, Andrea, you get it. Like, her life was messed up. I mean, there was a lot going on, and it wasn't like she is who she is because of the environment she was in and the world around her. And I mean, for lack of a better word, the patriarchy, like it made both Kristen and Emily who they were, and informed their dynamics, not because they were mean girls, but because they were they made the choices, and their actions and their feelings were based on the way they grew up and the things that happened to them and how that affected their psyche. So it wasn't about being mean to another woman because she's a woman. It's like, I got a lot of stuff
Right.
got a lot of stuff going on here. This is
right. Well, I kind of figured with this book, like likability was going to be out the window from page 1 because you watch them kill someone, kill a white man pretty quickly. And so my concern was not making them likable, it was making them understandable. And I wanted both characters. I did a lot of work of sort of figuring out both of their motivations in every scene and how, so that, their choices were going to make sense, even if it wasn't what you, the reader, would do, even if it isn't, even if things are read in a very different way by you, the reader, or you're putting pieces together, for example, before the narrator does. Like I did a lot of work for me to understand where both characters were coming from at every point. So it's also, it's interesting to me when people were like, oh, I hated one or the other. People hate both, people hate one or the other, but I just hated Emily. She was so awful. And I'm like, interesting. I love her. Like, I have a lot of love for both of them.
Wow.
And
I
thought about that a lot. It's like, why do I like Kristen?
Mm-hmm.
But I like her because of all the reasons Emily likes her. Like, she is a full person that has great qualities. She's just also manipulative and has all these things too. But when you saw like what she had been through, you were like, well, maybe it's kind of amazing that she turned out as well as she did, and she didn't have more stuff going on. I'm sorry, Melissa, you were saying something.
I was gonna say, I guess 2 things is that it like as like an abolitionist too, it is like helpful to like see, people who do bad things in like a completely 3-dimensional way, because it makes us like rethink what like justice can look like, and like how we like approach like what revenge can look like when someone does something like this. And also there's a really good show called Tell Me Your Secrets. I don't know if you've seen it, with Lily Robbie and Hamish Linklater. And it starts out, this character, you just like, she's going into witness protection. You think she's done this horrible thing. And then it's slowly revealed that she didn't, but because you've like given her so much empathy anyway, that at the end you've already forgiven her for doing this thing that she actually didn't do. So you should watch it. Anyway.
Yeah, I will. I mean, is it streaming? Is it on Netflix?
Yes,
or
it's on Amazon.
Amazon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, kind of piggybacking off that last question, Andrew, you talked about agency and like what happens when the women take that and go with it. And in both of your books, they do talk a lot about, I know Kristen specifically uses the word power. I can't remember if everyone does, but in both books, the ultimate power, like when they reach to grab their power, it's the ultimate power. It's literally life and death. For Andrea, death, they kill not 1, but 2 people. And Melissa, it's resurrection. It's bringing life back. I mean, so, but in both of these cases, big consequences come from both of these things, of this. So I don't know, I'd like to kind of talk about agency, power, like what, is there a balance? Like, do we, is there a pendulum of, where do we go with this? And both in reference to your characters, but also maybe your other writing, what it's like to be a woman author and a woman in this field where, I mean, just to be frank, we don't have as much power as men do, maybe not as much agency. So that's sort of a babbling way to get it out there, but I don't know if you guys have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this book, the character is really trying to, fill this like hole in herself about her identity, and like really wants to like be seen. And even though she has this like love, it's like not enough. So I think like I'm interested in exploring like what happens when you like search for power and agency and like try to like really know who you are, but it's at the expense of other people. And I think, I think it's interesting. I'm always interested in like seeing women like go where they shouldn't, like and like a curiosity killed the cat kind of way. And like what happens when you like can't stop scratching an itch, and what happens when you can't shut up about something and you're being too much, and then like you get it and you have to deal with it. And yeah, so like, and it's kind of like the with great power comes great responsibility. Like I'm also kind of talking about like this discussion of representation and like what it means when you do finally see yourself, someone who looks like you in a movie and like has an experience like you do, like is that enough? And then when you are being represented, like what are you going to do with that power? Because like visibility equals power. And are you going to like give it to other people? Are you going to like use your platform? So yeah, I'm because it can get really ugly, and instead of like using it for progress and for good, you can the mirror can be up for too long and it can crack. Yeah.
Well, and in the book, Melissa literally disappears. Like people can't see her anymore, or at least that's how I read it. So
yes,
and Kristen and Emily are, well, Emily at least is in fear for her, like for her life, basically. Like I'm going to get caught and I'm going to go to jail in Chile or Cambodia, and it's everything's going to be over because I protected myself.
Yeah. I mean, Emily is definitely existing in just increasing levels of terror, starting from sort of trauma, and then increasing in a big way early on in the book when they have this dead body on their hands and make decisions from there. And there's a line that I think Kristen says to Emily where she says something like, I'm going to paraphrase it. You know how they say that like the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is actually indifference. Like we're looking at the scale wrong. And she says in a similar way, the opposite of the opposite of fear isn't safety. The opposite of fear is power. The opposite of fear is knowing you'll always be in charge. Whoa. And so they both so Emily and Kristen, who come from very different, Kristen is always more of an alpha friend, and Emily's a little bit more of like the laid back one who goes along with things, but they both sort of have these journeys exploring that theme. And Emily needs to, figure out more about taking back her power, claiming her power within this, getting her slice of this patriarchal pie, which already, we're taught that success is a zero-sum game for women and her success is my failure when we're pitted against each other. So she sort of has to learn to take more power, whereas Kristen, exactly to Melissa's point, has to learn how to do it without leaving a path of destruction in her wake, which is definitely a theme throughout all of my books, with The Lost Night and The Hurt as well. They're sort of women in power. And it's interesting you're talking about mirrors cracking, and I think mine are a little more a different extension of the same idea, which is the glass ceiling. You have these sort of career women who are willing to do whatever it takes to succeed in sort of a man's world. And that can mean pulling up the ladder behind them. That can mean not, being as supportive of the women around them. And so there's sort of this, exactly what you said, like with great power comes great responsibility, and learning how to wield those two things. And how can we, how can we sort of deprogram that internalized misogyny telling us that, I can't be jealous of someone and happy for her at the same time. Her success is my own failure. I can't root for other women because that's rooting against myself. Like, how can we sort of deprogram all of that within our industry, within publishing, within everything else, and sort of, bring take back some of the power and increase sort of power for women everywhere. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really fertile ground for literature, feminist literature, to be exploring that stuff in different ways. And hopefully it's in like really fun, readable packages like Zombie Selena.
Well,
and
like
thrillers.
both of yours. I mean, yeah, exactly. Within a thriller that both gives you that adrenaline jolt, those rides of, but then also like food for thought, which was great. And then just the fun of just letting yourself go into this crazy idea of zombie Selena and what happens with all that. But then the food for thought in both of them. So I appreciated that. I mean, I love a good story. I love a good story, but I also like a little meat in my stories. So it was really nice to have that with both of yours. We are coming close to the end of our time. So for the final question, and it's totally up to you guys, if you were working on anything new right now that you wanted to share with us, or like any projects you've got going, or what's going on, if you wanted to tell us that in the last of our time together. Melissa, if you want to, or unless Andrea, unless you're ready to go, sorry.
All right. Zoom, we still haven't nailed Zoom.
Not yet. We've done really well, I think. Yes.
I am. So We Were Never Here has been optioned for a movie adaptation with Netflix. So that's sort of the next thing that I'm not going to be super involved with, but I'm very excited about to watch
That's
it.
awesome.
Sort of.
That's amazing. I was gonna say, I was like, this is like, hello Netflix. Like,
well, and we didn't get to talk about this, but did that come through Reese at all, or is that, you think that's
No, they're unrelated.
It's a whole different. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Reese's Book Club thing was a totally separate component, but I'm very excited to see what Netflix is going to do with it. And I just turned in my very first draft of my fourth book, which I can't talk about too much, but it's still going to be about those complex relationships between women. And whereas We Were Never Here is very sort of broad and sweeping, and we move over several continents, this one is going to be very, very cloistered, small, more of like a domestic suspense feel for me.
Awesome. Melissa?
Cool. I'm currently trying to turn this into a screenplay, and seeing what happens with that. And I'm working on some short stories, also more complicated women, and they're kind of like spooky, spectral short stories about like women falling down literal and figurative holes. Yeah.
That sounds great. I look forward to seeing both of what comes out from that, and if they're put into film versions or TV versions or whatever, and to see more writing from both of you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today and humoring me. Thank you, audience, for your participation. Thank you, Enrica, for your interpretation services, and Nathan for your technology help. We hope this is just the beginning of the book festival. It runs through October 31st. So many great presentations and events, ways you can participate. Go to sixbridgesbookfestival.org to find out more. Come see me at Wordsworth Books to get your copies of the books. Melissa's will be there next week. Andrea's is there now. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.